bit of a distance to get your bill to the table.
First reading, a bill for an act to provide for a parliamentary joint committee to investigate establishing an Australia Fund and for related purposes.
Now I call the honourable member for Fairfax.
I move that the bill be read a second time. We have a limited time on this earth. Time for all of us is limited. Indeed, time is the enemy in our lives. In this place, at this time, and our time to recognise the shortcomings and inadequacy of the system, to see what can be done to change and to make our life and the life of all Australians better. The government was elected over 6 months ago. There was a lot of competing priorities for the Prime Minister and all ministers of the government. During the past 6 months, there has been serious hardship suffered by Australians due to drought, bushfires and radical changes in the economic future of this country. Government, by its very nature, is slow to act, and Parliament is slower to take action. But when there is a natural disaster and major economic needs, and the response of government needs to be better than it is. The financial muscle of the Commonwealth has rarely been flexed as it could be to assist Australians in time of need. All of us are diminished by the injustice that has been done to many Australians because the system of government has been slow to respond. I realise I am but one member of this House, that introducing this bill I cannot be sure that it will get the support of the government or the opposition. But I hope it can. It's not meant to be critical of government or the opposition. It's not about Liberal policy or Labor policy. It's about the right policy. It's not about getting political kudos. It's more about realising we need to do better. This bill is not a financial measure. It merely is to pursue an idea that this House should establish parliamentary committees to investigate and report back to the House on the establishment of Australia Fund, which would be a body rather than a fund and would have the resources of the Commonwealth to act decisively in time of need. To determine what needs to be done to ensure that when natural disasters such as droughts, bushfires and floods are encountered, there's an automatic measures in place to ensure Australians do not have to wait for the government to take action. Suicide is often a companion of misfortune when Australians lose hope in the future. They're isolated and are overcome with the feeling of guilt, responsibility to their families and children. If we act more decisively, more lives can be saved. This bill is to investigate if the response time for government to mobilise and to consider the best and most appropriate responses can be dramatically improved. Considering the current drought, it took the government over 6 months to respond to this matter. I'm not convinced the opposition would have been any quicker. It's not about blame. I know the minister and the government did all they thought they could do in the circumstances. When we consider the current drought assistance package announced by the government, the question has to be asked, could it have been more inclusive and been targeted at wider industry and communities? The package seems to be targeted at beef and sheep cattle properties. I commend the government for providing it, but there are more things to consider than cattle and sheep. Most rural towns and businesses rely on their trade and employment and small-scale manufacturing of the rural industries to support them. There are many rural properties that are involved in primary production but have not received any real assistance at all. I don't think that this was designed by the government, but the government's advice, or any government advice, may have been limited. It's time this House investigated if Australia cannot handle these situations better for the benefit of all Australians and the taxpayer. There are many challenges to face to ensure the economic policy in manufacturing is encouraged in this country, that Australia does what it does best, and that government policy doesn't cause businesses to go broke. That is if our enterprises need, for legitimate reasons, to make them more efficient and viable in the future, or if they suffer some temporary disadvantage due to adverse or unfair government policy or inaction, then the resolution of such issues are not dependent on the political process. Rather, we have a proactive group, once established, that can act decisively, if needed, to preserve Australia's interest. The fact remains that the Australian government is the #1 petitioner of bankruptcies and company liquidations in this country and the #1 destroyer of jobs and enterprises. If business could continue to trade and jobs not lost, the government and the taxpayer would be the winner. It doesn't make sense for the government to move people from productive employment to unemployment in Centrelink when their enterprise can continue and be sold to more capable management. If you look at the productivity of Australia today compared with yesterday, the Productivity Commission has a lot to answer for. Government needs sound advice, not just from academics, but from experienced wealth creators to form common-sense policies. The bill is just for this House to allow the setting up of a group of the House to consider these issues and report back to the House. The purpose of this bill is to establish a joint parliamentary committee to investigate establishing the Australia Fund. Such a fund would be designed to support and assist reconstruction of Australian rural and manufacturing industries in times of crisis, including natural disasters such as drought, floods and bushfires. In cases of a world financial crisis or unfair market intervention or manipulation, it is envisaged that the Australia Fund would have the ability, on the basis of an assessment of industry or business, to provide emergency and ongoing drought, flood, bushfire relief, loan money to businesses, act as a guarantor for loans, capitalise, waive interest, purchase existing bank loans, assume control of relevant property of businesses for a specified time. In this way, the body would be designed to enable business to continue operations, earn revenue, employ workers, pay taxes, rather than be prematurely wound up, and support communities affected by natural disasters. It will also provide funds for industry and company restructuring and the acquisition of new technologies to make business more economically viable and internationally competitive. As part of its investigation as to the need for the fund, the committee would undertake hearings in all capital cities and major rural centres and specifically examine the impact of rural Australia on the ongoing drought and world market price fluctuations for primary industry production. The committee's terms of reference would also include reviewing existing bankruptcy and insolvency laws with the aim of introducing legislation designed to assist companies to trade through difficult times rather than be closed down. The existing taxation laws relating to bankruptcy will also be reviewed. The possible introduction of an equivalent of United States Chapter 11 provisions would also be investigated. Administrative support to the committee could be provided by the House or Senate departments. At the completion of its inquiry, the committee would table before Parliament its detailed report and its findings and recommendation. I commend the bill to the House.
The motion has been seconded by the member for Kennedy.